Counting calories, steps, reps, and sets can be fun, but I'm going to be doing less of all of these. Allow me to explain. At the start of the new year, I was shown an ad for Fitbit multiple times that said, "Good habits start here," or something to that effect. Now I'm being shown an ad for Apple Watch that says, "Stay active, stay healthy." There seems to be a popular school of thought, at least advertised to me, that one needs to quantify oneself to achieve health. This includes counting calories, probably the most popular one, counting steps, also very popular, tracking sleep, tracking the distance ran, walked, biked, hiked, etc., tracking reps, sets, heart rate, and more. Now, can this be fun? Yes. Can it be motivating? Sure. But is this healthy? I have recently been introduced to a school of thought that is interested in going in a different direction. Now, a few years back, I purchased a Fitbit for myself and for wifey. I knew it was not a perfect system, but if it helps, hey, why not? Then, after using Fitbit for some time, I read a line in a book that made me think that there was something fundamentally wrong with Fitbit's approach to health. The line was simply, when a measure becomes the target, it ceases to be a good measure. This is from Atomic Habits by James Clear. On reading this, my mind instantly went to the Fitbit, and this seems to be an inherent problem for the device. The number of steps taken in a day is a measure of health. But for Fitbit, that measure is also one of the more popular goals, say 10 or 15,000 steps. I ended up phasing out the Fitbit. I continued to use an app on my phone to track my morning runs, but even that was phased out in the course of doing my digital detox. Thank you, Cal Newport. More recently, this idea has been rekindled by 2 books and 1 YouTube video. The books are Antifragile by Nassim Taleb and The Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century by Brett Weinstein and Heather Hine. The video was Stop Counting Reps by the YouTube channel minus the gym. Links in the description below. Let's start with Brett and Heather's The Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. There were a couple of quotes that stood out to me in the book's application sections that were at the end of each chapter. The first was count fewer things about your life, calories, steps, minutes, and do more. In a later chapter, they also say, rely less on metrics, more on experience, hypotheses, and deriving truth and meaning from first principles. Now, why do they give these pieces of advice? In the section that they titled The Laboratory of Self, they argue that humans are each unique complex systems, and what works for one individual, depending on the area, may not work for another individual. They assert that a better approach is to banish noise, notice small potential patterns, and test hypotheses within yourself for what works. Now remember the concept of noise, because we will return to it again when we bring in Nassim Taleb's book, Antifragile. Continuing with Brett and Heather, later on in their book, they argue that one way to build a system that is not prone to senescence, a word which here means the condition or process of deterioration with age, is not to optimize for a single value. They contend that if you optimize for a single value, all other values, every single other parameter, will collapse. Now, while this discussion was applied to society at large, it is a discussion of systems, and as I learned from reading Atomic Habits, systems are more powerful than goals for achieving personal well-being. Now let's bring in Nassim Taleb's book, Antifragile, and reintroduce the concept of noise. Nassim Taleb describes noise as useless information that needs to be filtered out so that way meaningful information, the signal, can be understood. He argues that the more frequently you check data, and the more data you have, the more noise has to be filtered out. He uses the example of major events in the news. Now, because major events are rare relative to mundane everyday events, most of what is in the news is effectively noise. And thus, the more frequently one checks the news, the more noise one is exposed to and has to be filtered out. Taleb goes on to say, I have been repeating that in a natural environment, a stressor is information. Too much information would thus be too much stress, exceeding the threshold of antifragility. Antifragility is a word which here means benefits from harm. In other words, there is a downside to the wealth of data that we can feed ourselves through fitness trackers, other quantified health systems, and other areas of our life. One of Taleb's closing statements in the section of his book where he talks about noise really stands out to me as taking a jab at the glorification of data. He says, "It has been very hard for me to explain that the more data you get, the less you know what's going on, and the more iatrogenics, a word which here means harm caused by intervention, you will cause. People are still under the illusion that science means data." Allow me to apply this concept to a different area of health, that is digital well-being or screen time. As mentioned, a while ago I did the digital detox after reading Cal Newport's book, Digital Minimalism. While I did find this very helpful and I did reduce my screen time, I learned that screen time as a metric is not necessarily the most useful. For example, an hour spent FaceTiming one of my siblings is far superior screen time to an hour spent on YouTube. And even an hour spent on YouTube watching a lecture, say, on clinical psychology, science, or history is a far superior use of screen time within YouTube than an hour of watching cat videos, especially if you're me and you have zero interest in cats. At some level, screen time becomes noise and it is no longer a useful metric. To bring back the quote from Atomic Habits, if the metric, here screen time, becomes the goal, say 30 minutes a day, then it ceases to be a useful metric. This would be in part because it would be sacrificing benefits, such as FaceTiming one of my siblings or learning valuable information from a knowledgeable professional. This last point ties into the quote from Brett and Heather that optimizing for a single value, here screen time, results in the degradation of every other value, here time spent talking to siblings, or time spent learning valuable information. In conclusion, this is not to say that metrics should never be used. They do indeed have a function. For example, even if I don't count reps every time I do push-ups, counting them once a week or every 2 weeks would give me a pulse on my progress. But the more frequently I counted my reps, the more noise would be injected into the equation. To return to the screen time example, Apple happily provides a screen time report at the end of each week, freeing me from checking on a daily basis and allowing me to dive in to each app, and I know what I did inside each app, so I know if the screen time was useful or not. With all that said, how do I go forward from here? Well, I don't have a Fitbit for one, and we already have had success on a high-fat, low-carb diet in the past without counting calories, something that I was surprised by, and indeed I was skeptical that it would actually work. I will refrain from counting reps, say when I'm doing push-ups on a daily basis, but I will count every so often to get a pulse on my progress. I will track other things less as well, such as screen time, distance ran, sleep, etc. There will be exceptions, but to cite a heuristic, less is more. Or, to paraphrase Brett and Heather, count less, do more. That's it for today, folks. Thank you for watching. Bye.